Welcome to Cinema Body, Cinema Mind. I'm Dario Linares, your host as usual for this show, and it's a great pleasure this time around to welcome writer, podcaster, and academic Daniel Moran to the show. Daniel, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I can't wait to talk about this stuff.
Great. And yeah, we were just talking off mic about where you are. You're just in New Jersey, a little
Yeah.
bit outside of New York. How's New York this fine Sunday morning?
Well, I haven't been in New York in a couple of months, but I'm sure it's fine. I live about 30 minutes south of New York.
Okay.
If you
Is
live in
there
New
a
Jersey,
is there do New Jersey and New York make that very clear distinction? You know what I
they
mean?
do.
These are different places.
They do.
Okay.
And the people in New York let you know it.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because it's like the reason I asked about that is because I've always sort of want to go to that part of the world and I haven't yet. And sort of cynically, one of the reasons I like talking to people from New York, New Jersey area, let's say, is that it's nice to have a network, and one day when I get there, it'll be great to have some people to hook up with for a coffee.
Absolutely.
But also, with this conversation that I've invited you into, and you've gladly accepted, this comes on the back of a couple of articles that you've written on Substack.
Mhm.
About the cinema going experience, which obviously ties into the interest that I have when I'm putting this, for the underpinning of this show. And this is the two articles are the biggest lie about the movies
Mhm.
and how would I run
If I ran a theater, I think
if I ran a theater. Sorry, a little bit of an edit point there. If I ran a theater. So these are kind of companion pieces for
Right.
each other. But before we get to them, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your formative background with regards to cinema, because I was doing a little bit of kind of research in terms of your sort of relationship to cinema, but it's a very interesting background. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your sort of formative self as a cinema going person.
That would be a great book to read, people's formative films. It might not be your favorite movies, but the movies that made you love movies or the books that made you love books. So
Sure.
when that's really funny. When I was a little kid, we had a black and white TV in the basement, and we had a color TV upstairs, but a black and white one in the basement. And so that's where the kids would go and blah blah blah. And I remember one time being sent down there for something or just to get out of my parents' way, and they were showing 2001: A Space Odyssey. As you can see, it's one of my favorites. Um,
Sure.
on this TV, and I was like, "Oh, I heard about this movie." I don't know. I was maybe 7 or 8, so I watched it in black and white, mind you. I mean, of all the movies you
Right.
shouldn't see in black and white, it's 2001. But I remember watching the monkeys in the beginning and thinking, like, "This is kind of strange." Then we get to the space stuff, and I'm like, "Oh, I like watching Star Trek, but this doesn't seem like Star Trek. Like,
Yeah.
no one's shooting anybody." And then when he got to the end, I remember being very, very afraid. I was alone there in the basement. I remember, being very unsettled and not knowing what was going on, but knowing that there was something interesting there, even as a little kid, and, like, that never got over, and then I finally saw it in color, and, I've read all of
Right.
it, and, so that was, like, a real formative one, and it's funny, another formative one I just got to re-experience, which was a great experience in a movie theater, maybe we'll come to this, is that for whatever reason, on Thanksgiving Day, which is, in November in the United States, our local TV station would play King Kong. I don't know
Right.
why that was. It has nothing to do with Thanksgiving. No one eats a turkey in King Kong. It's just our local station played it. So every year as a kid, oh, King Kong is gonna be on. And every year I'd watch King Kong, and I loved that movie as a kid, and I just got to see it at a Revival theater last week on a big screen for the first time.
Wow.
That he is still the king. He is still the king.
Right.
So, those are really, like, formative movies in my life, and I've seen, thousands since then, and, I don't know if King Kong is my favorite movie, but certainly as a little kid, being made aware of what a movie can do,
Yeah.
those are 2 big ones.
Yeah. It's interesting with that film, especially the ending, because I use that to show to students how films like Star Wars and then Dunkirk were shooting the aerial
Right.
sequences, and obviously the special effects are very different, but the kind of the construction of the shots is actually quite similar in terms of where your awareness of where everything is in space, kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, and is he and, like, you don't you can't even understand the first time you see it or maybe the 10th time you see it, you're still trying to catch up to it.
Mm.
But the idea that there's something out there, and that's kind of one of the things we'll get to in the article I wrote, is that like there's something out there that's smarter than you, and
Yeah.
it's more wonderful, and you should give it your full attention, even if you don't understand it. You don't have to say like, "Well, I didn't get it," but like, okay, it's not meant to get all at once, and
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I never saw anything like that before.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you just said there that you were sent down to the basement, and it's so clear to me, so many people that I speak to, that they connect the film to a kind of spatial environment or a circumstance as much as
Yeah,
the film itself. It's kind of, I remember what I was doing, and I remember what situation I was in, and it's funny. I mean, I was wondering, sort of, in terms of cinema going itself. Do you remember kind of being taken early as a kid? Is it something that
yeah.
your parents would take you to the cinema on a regular basis?
Yeah, I remember I'm old enough to remember standing in line to see Star Wars
Right.
and getting to the almost to the front and then being told, "Oh, you're sold out," and looking at my dad.
God.
Dad always took me to the movies. He was the movie, and just looking up at him and saying like, "What are we doing?" And my father had to make the choice. Well, do I stand in line for another 2 hours, just stand here,
Sure.
this kid, or do we just go like say we'll come another time? And he stood in line with me. Um, so that's really funny you say that about like formative places and people you're with. So I remember seeing Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back with my dad.
Right.
And I remember the big rule in my house growing up was I always wanted to see the movies on Friday night. That's when they came out. And
Okay.
of course, my parents, especially my dad, being a guy who like worked all week and stuff, he was like, "We're not going to see the movie on Friday night." And I'm like, "No, come on, everyone else is going." And of course, my father's like, "Everyone else is going. That's why we're not going tonight." But
Yeah.
and to his
So you
credit,
empathize with him now, because I
yeah,
certainly do,
like
you know?
yeah, totally. My kids are like, "Can we go see?" You know, when they're little, "We've got to see the
Yeah.
Avengers. We got to see it tonight." Like, we're not going tonight.
No.
But it's funny to my dad's credit. Another thing he did, I don't think he did this by design. I just think he did it because he didn't care. Was he didn't care what the movie was rated. He didn't care about any of this stuff. He took me
Oh,
as a
right,
kid. So
okay.
I was like 7 or 8, and I saw Alien, and also
Wow.
like I remember seeing Magic, the William Goldman, movie with Anthony Hopkins. I remember seeing all these movies in the theater, and today, they would, the state would try to like, take away your children or something. But to my dad's credit, he was like, "Okay, let's go."
Wow.
So, and I'm glad we did because those movies had a big effect on me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember when I, went to the video shop back in the
Yeah.
VHS days and got a copy of The Terminator by a very lax,
Yeah.
assistant there. It was just like, looking at me, "Are you old enough for this?" And it's like, "Oh, whatever," you know what I mean? And
Right.
I just got the video home, and I was kind of like shaking with excitement that I'd got this 18 movie, because the big poster of Arnie was up,
Right.
everywhere. I was just like, "I've got to see that film,"
I
you
will
know?
I one more if you this is really interesting. You made me think of more things. Another one was I remember being a kid, and it was the first time that The Exorcist was gonna be on TV.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And of course, there were in America, there were 1,000,001 warnings about this film. Now, when you're a kid, that's catnip, right? All you
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
know is, "Listen,
yeah.
viewer discretion advised." You're like, "Well, I got it." It's like the Terminator, like, the fact that it's rated R and so controversial, that makes me wanna see it even more. So I remember my parents were like, "You shouldn't watch this, Danny. You shouldn't watch this," right? And I'm like, "Well, I'm going downstairs. I'm gonna watch The Exorcist." I was a kid, and it was even in the edited TV version. So I'm watching the beginning with Max von Sydow, and he's out, finding uncovering the statue, and I'm like, "Ah, the dogs are fighting," and I'm like, "Well, this isn't so scary. I don't know what everyone's railing about." And as soon as Mercedes McCambridge starts doing the devil voice and Linda Blair, I was like, boom, up those stairs, like to be continued. So I remember running up those stairs and realizing like the movie won.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a fantastic story for sure. Yeah, and, this is definitely the sort of tenor of the direction
Yeah.
that I wanna go in terms of the conversation. But maybe we could talk a little bit about sort of your background, because I'm right in saying you're an academic, right? And you're in, literary studies. Is that correct?
I'm in different worlds. By
Right.
day, I work in a large public school district in the school
Okay.
system, and then at night I work as an academic, and I've taught literature and research writing and history.
Right.
So I went to school for English and for history.
Sure. So your Substack is called Pages and Frames,
Right.
and you set it up very much as the sort of intersection of film and literature. So
Mhm.
I just wondered how you kind of consider that relationship in terms of then structuring your sort of cultural identity. Because I'm assuming there's kind of like elements of film and elements of writing and literature that sort of feed into each other? And how do you sort of conceive of them as two constituent parts of who you are in that sense?
Wow, that's a big question. I think that people that like to read a lot are also generally the same people that like movies. Like,
Right.
generally, right? If you meet somebody anywhere in a bookstore, you can
Mm.
say, what are some of your favorite movies?" And they won't say, "Oh, I don't know. I kinda like everything." Like, they'll have really strong opinions like you do, like I
Yeah.
do, and it's the same thing if you talk to people who like movies, they generally like to read a lot.
Right.
So, when I discovered Substack, which I love, when I discovered Substack, there's a lot of great writing on it, and I thought to myself, "Well, what would I wanna do?" And I really thought about this because I didn't wanna make an account and then, like, 2 months later realize, "Oh, I should have done something else." So,
Sure.
I worked very hard on my non-remunerative Substack account, and I thought to myself, "Well, what do I like to read about? I like to read about books and movies." And they always say you should write what you like to read, and so
Sure.
that's how it came up. So sometimes a lot of times what I'll do is I'll write about, um, like an adaptation of a film and how it's like or unlike the thing, and not just to say like, "Well, this is the same and that's not the same," but like how the page and the frame of the film kind of explore the same story. So like I've done that with The Hustler. I did it with
Oh, wow.
Money. I've done
I
it with,
love those two.
they're great movies, they're great movies.
Yeah, yeah,
So I've talked about that, right? And I love it because it makes me go back and reread The Hustler and think about it more and write, and like to write at the stuff, it
yeah,
really,
yeah.
there's a difference between just talking about it and then, like, actually having to make sentences,
Sure.
and I find that it makes me think about things harder.
Yeah. I love those two as adaptations as well because they do that thing of they don't take the book literally.
No, no.
And I think that I mean, for me, the best film this year that was up for an Oscar was Nickel Boys, and that kind of did the same. It turned the book into a film, but the film sort of stood for itself. I mean,
Yes.
are you sort of on the same page when it comes to kind of like adaptation? Because I know there's always sort of there's some people who kind of say, who just offhand kind of lazily say it's never as good as the book.
Well, that's totally wrong, and I'm actually working on a project now about that very idea that people say, "Well,
Okay.
the book was always better." You could name off the top of your head 20 movies that are better than their books. I
Mm.
mean, it's easy. You can do it like, Jaws, The Godfather, Psycho. You can go through like 2001.
Mm.
There's a lot of them out there. But I think yes, you're right. There are these adaptation snobs who love to say, well, the book was, and they're like, well, I read the book. The movies for like and but there's plenty of interesting movies in their own right that take a book and do something with it. So when you were speaking, you reminded me of The Revenant. You see The Revenant?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I don't know if you've ever read the book.
No, 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 I haven't read the book
So
before.
it's got the book's got, the bear attack,
Mm.
and then it goes on, and then it's like this. They go in
Right,
totally
okay.
different directions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think the movie does a much better job of exploring this idea about revenge and what it does to you. And I read the book first, and then I saw the film, and halfway through the film, I'm like, huh. And in the credits, it actually says, it says like based in part on the novel. There's some kind of like strange
Yeah,
disclaimer there.
yeah, yeah.
And so I think when you adapt something, I think when directors and screenwriters adapt something, their job isn't to make it as accurate as it can be.
Yeah.
It's to make a new thing. And that's what if the best movie about this is Adaptation with Nicolas Cage,
Sure, sure.
which is hilarious because he's trying to adapt like an unadaptable book about
Yeah.
humans.
And it's interesting because I think, the new film by Paul Thomas Anderson is another
Yeah,
pinch on
it's an adaptation.
adaptation.
It's Vineland, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think that his films, particularly in their sense of adaptation, what they bring is that sense of vibe. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Manages to capture the essence of what it's like to be in the company of these characters
Yes.
and in this world really beautifully.
That's exactly right, because when I read Inherent Vice, I read, and then I saw that he was making the movie, and I
Yeah.
read it not knowing he was, and then I saw his movie, and somebody said, "Well, was it accurate?" And I'm like, "Well, you can't like film Thomas Pynchon. It's like people trying to film, um, Henry James.
Sure.
You can't get inside. Like you read Henry James for those sentences. If we're going inside someone's head, you can still make a very good film with the
Yeah.
plot of Portrait of a Lady or something. But at the same, it's exactly right. I think that Paul Thomas Anderson had the vibe of Inherent Vice. And that's a Thomas Pynchon thing anyway. You don't read
Yeah.
Thomas Pynchon you read it for the vibe.
Yeah. No, no, for sure, for sure. I'm looking forward to that, without
Me
you.
too.
Um, you've also written a book about Flannery O'Connor.
Yep.
Can you tell us who that is and what was
Sure.
your sort of interest in her? Because it's a character I think the name I've heard of, but I really don't know an awful lot about.
So Flannery O'Connor was a terrific American writer who lived in the first half of the 20th century. She was the tagline of her. She was the Catholic novelist in the Protestant South,
Okay.
and she grew up in Georgia, and she was a Catholic who wrote about Catholic themes and ideas in her short stories and two novels. But the great thing about her is she didn't write stories about very pious nuns or priests who like kind of like help a little kid after he gets, he loses the little league game. Her books and her stories are violent and dark and grim, and where
Wow.
she's often called grotesque, but they're really, really powerful. And
Sure.
she had her signature story is called "A Good Man Is Hard to Find." That's the name of her story collection, and that's about a rotten old lady who, through a series of mishaps, comes face to face with a serial killer, and she has a conversation with him,
Okay.
and it doesn't end well.
Okay.
But she's there's no one like her in the world.
Right.
And John Huston made a film of her novel Wise Blood, which is really, really
Okay.
terrific. And there's a new movie about maybe in the last year called Wildcat that Ethan Hawke wrote and directed with
Right.
his
Right.
daughter Maya in, which is
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
great. And I wrote about it on Substack, but that's,
Yeah.
she's somebody who people that like her like really like her with me.
Right. Yeah. No, no, that's great because
Yeah.
actually, I mean, one of the great things about sort of podcasting and speaking to people about films
Mhm.
and books and is you get recommendations, you get
Sure.
places to go that you haven't been
Yeah.
before. So that's one I'm definitely going to look up for sure. Um, and speaking of podcasting, you have a podcast called the 15-Minute Film Fanatics, which
Yes.
has been going with has been going since 2020.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Five
And you've
years.
got a co-host
Yes, I
for
do.
that. So tell us about the inspiration for that show.
So this is really funny, or at least funny to me. A friend of mine, Mike Takla, one time I felt kind of out of touch with him. I hadn't seen him in a long time. He was actually a former student of mine. And then one time on Christmas Day, he happened to be in the neighborhood. He wasn't living around New Jersey anymore, and he texted me and said, "Listen, I got your Christmas present. I want to drop it off. What are you doing?" And it was like the nighttime of Christmas Day, and I'm like, "Oh, we're just kind of like unwinding." He said,
Okay.
"Come on over." Comes over. Within 20 minutes, he's teaching my kids how to play backgammon. It was like a really, really fun night. And when he was leaving, we just started talking about movies, and we were like, "Oh, we gotta get in touch together." And then we would talk to each other once in a while, and my wife would say, "Well, how's Mike doing? What you guys talk about?" And I was like, "We basically just talked about movies, and not about our families or about these big things." She's like, "That's what you guys do?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we just talk about movies and books." So as almost as a lark, we said, "Let's make this podcast. What's it going to be called?" And so we kind of had our like declaration of principles, like in Citizen Kane, and we
Right.
said it's going to be short, and we said there's going to be no banter. We're not going to like start by like, "Hey, how's it going? What you do this week?" It's boom, we're going to dive in.
Yep.
And we started at my dining room table with one microphone. So we'd learned what we were doing. And now we've done almost 300 episodes. And every episode has the same format. It's supposed to be 15 minutes. They're not 15 anymore. We just can't help it. And that's fine. But the idea is that the first segment's going to be our overall take on the movie. And one guy recommends the movie to the other. And we don't talk about it till we record. So
Right.
it could be a movie
That's
we
good.
just saw. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
supposed
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
fresh, right? It's supposed to replicate the car ride home from the theater.
Gotcha.
So when you're in a
Yeah.
car and someone's going like, "Yeah, but then why did the cop not you're like, "No, no, you're missing the point."
Yeah.
So the first part's always about our overall take, and the second part is we each offer a moment from the movie we think is really interesting,
Hmm.
and then the third part is we talk about the ending or the title.
Hmm.
And we record every week, and then we, gussy them up, edit them, and put them out there, and then I try to write an accompanying thing on pages of frames.
Yeah.
But it's just a great way to like, sustain a friendship and like to make you have great conversations like we're doing now.
Sure. And it's nice when you set up, like you say, the declaration of principles, but
Yeah.
then it gets to a point, doesn't it, in the sort of podcast development where that can be broken. Suddenly it
It does.
becomes like, well, actually it's limiting us now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a really nice short again, because it's not too much longer than 15 minutes.
Right.
But I listen to a lot of long form stuff, but
Mhm.
this is one I've picked up now, and the short form element of it really kind of works because I think you do get that sort of sense of working through what you both think in real time, but
Yeah.
not worrying too much about, what the sort of overarching discourse is around a particular film. And I think that's
Correct.
sometimes a little bit of a problem with the way that podcasts gone about not just film, about art. It's kind of like, what is everybody else saying? Because that needs to
Right.
be inputted into the show.
You're 100% right, because that's true for podcasts. It's true, unfortunately, for a lot of academic writing.
Mm,
Like, that's why Substack is so great. So
yeah,
Mike and I, when we record, by the end of it, I'm thinking something totally different.
sure.
And then because if we go back and forth a lot of times, I'm like, "That movie's far better than I thought it was," or we get new ideas. But that's what I love about Substack. That's what I love
Yeah,
about
yeah,
podcasting, is that you don't have to check a million different things to make sure, you don't have to get peer reviewed.
yeah,
You put it out there, and if someone
yeah.
likes it, they'll tell you.
No, I know, I'm exactly the same. It's like my academic career has taken very much of a turn away from the traditions and,
Right.
for good and bad in some senses. But it's interesting there. I mean, talking about Substack now, the development of the platform is interesting because it's allowed much more of an integration, I think, between podcasting and writing.
Yes.
Um, and it's now it's interesting to see some of the possibilities that have emerged around different forms of understanding things like cinephilia,
Mhm.
fandom, and critical analysis. So, yeah, I mean, I guess the question I'm getting to is like, for me, there is this sort of sense of podcasting and writing now are complementing each other
Mhm.
in my own mind. I mean, how do you see it?
100%. I mean, I think, you're not gonna get bigger poster boy than for Substack than me. I
Right.
think it's great. I think the people are on it. I hope it stays like it does and doesn't get
Sure.
ruined like so many other things. But I think in terms of writing and podcasting, um, I think it's a great opportunity because, as you know, everyone that starts a podcast, people do like 3 episodes and then they're like, "This is too much work." Like,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
chances
yeah.
you know that. And it's the same thing with writing. So there's all these Substacks on there that people my thoughts, and then they just forget it. But I think that when you find people that try to overlap, and that's what I try to do. So I also have a podcast on Pages and Frames where I'll invite people on who are experts in one area to talk about a movie that goes along with their area.
Okay.
So this guy, Tim
Yeah, yeah.
Conover, who wrote about, going off the grid in Colorado, he came on and talked about Nomadland,
Right. Right.
kind of things like that.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So, but I think that Substack is great because it really is like a democratic, small d forum where people can put things out there. If I could tell you a really, really quick little story about
Sure, sure, sure.
why I love Substack. Maybe 2 years ago, I was, a university press, a real university press, was gonna put a collection of essays together about David Mamet, the director and the playwright
Yeah,
and
yeah.
novelist, everyone, Glengarry Glen Ross, and, The Verdict and a million other things. And, I put in a proposal, and I said, "Okay," and I was gonna write a chapter, and it was gonna be on his film Homicide, which I think is just a if you've never seen Homicide, it's Joe Mantegna, William H.
Yeah,
Macy, it's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
So, so I wrote the thing, and I did a lot of work on it, and I think it came out really well. And then, like, we were like right about to submit and get them going, and it was far along in the process. And then David Mamet went on TV. I don't know if he went on Fox News or what he went on, and started spouting his mouth off about something. And then the press decided he was a non-person
Right.
and that they were canceling the book. Now they already interviewed him for the book.
Yeah.
They interviewed with David Mamet. He already won the Pulitzer Prize. I mean, I know what he said. It doesn't matter, but he was canceled. And then so we all got an email that said, "All right, well, we're not gonna publish the book." And I had this long kind of thing I was gonna write back, like, "Well, we still watch Chinatown. If we're gonna start, like, going through all the artists and
Yeah.
stuff, that's interesting philosophically, but you're really gonna cancel the book?" But I just said, "Fine." That would
Yeah.
never happen on Substack. Like, you don't have to worry about getting other people's approval, and if people don't like it, they'll tell you, and if they like it,
Yeah.
they'll tell you.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, and it's something that I'm always wrestling with in terms of that relationship between kind of the art and the artist, and then
Yeah.
also the encroachment of kind of ideology
Yeah,
in the idea of what we should and shouldn't be interested in, or even kind
right.
of deal with, engage with. And I think
I think
it's
that's fascinating.
I mean, it's to me. I mean, we can sort of later on, maybe we'll round off talking a little bit about the state of the world. But I think one of the problems is now that we've shut off the possibilities of kind of critical engagement. It's just like, no,
Done.
stop, you've crossed the
Right.
line. But the problem is the goalposts, the line is always moving.
Correct.
You don't know where it is, you know?
Correct. That's why my first thought, I'm like, well, I read the book, The Long Goodbye, about the making of Chinatown, and it confirms every horrible thing you can imagine.
Yeah.
But I can't go back in time and make myself not think that's a great movie. So I don't know what
Yeah,
to say. And I say this with all humility, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
No, that's right.
I think that whole thing about the artist, that's a really, really interesting philosophical question, but I don't pretend to have an answer for.
No. No, and I guess, I mean, again, we'll move on from this, but I guess everybody has to make their own
Yeah.
moral or has to have their own moral compass around this, but also have the good faith to let other people make a different
Mhm.
decision if they want to. You know, if I wanna watch a Woody Allen movie,
Yeah.
I'd expect the person, if I say I'm gonna go watch a Woody Allen movie, I would expect, that person to be able to give me that sense of being able to hold the understanding of how he might be a problematic character in my head
Right.
at the same time as watching the movie, you know what I mean?
Correct, because the movie hasn't changed, but we have, and that's like
That's right.
that's what's hard to reconcile.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, God, it's that's a kind of
Whole other
worms,
podcast.
indeed, for sure. Um, yeah, and one of the interesting things I think about Substack as well is how the writing about cinema and arts more broadly in legacy media, I think, has become very narrow, very
Mhm.
systematized, often just kind of like seeming like PR. I mean,
Yep.
don't get me wrong, there are great writers out
Sure.
there, but I think that there is a level of freedom, and there's also a level of experimentation on
Mhm.
Substack that perhaps legacy media is not interested in or feels it can't produce right now.
Yeah, that's 100% true because you find people with such incredible niche interests on there.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I'm only gonna write about noir from the '40s, or I'm only gonna write about this, I'm only gonna write about Picasso, or I'm only go and, it's great. Like, that's what you hope like a great library would be like.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And it's a great sort of moment, I think, for Substack as well. I mean, like you, I think it's got its problems, but
Mhm.
lots of people are transferring over to from Twitter and
Yes.
these other spaces for reasons we all know about. I mean, that's an interesting question as well that I'm always wrestling with is how to deal with the sort of labor of one's own attention and
Mhm.
the noise of YouTube and podcasts and all the other things that you could be dealing with. How do you sort of deal with the bombardment that comes at us?
Well, that's really funny because you said that you talked about people coming over from Twitter and the bombardment. One of the things that drives it shouldn't bother me. It doesn't really bother me, but it's funny when you're on Substack and you see that like James Patterson just came on, or
Right.
Stevie Pink's gonna have a
Yeah.
Substack. No, come on, man. Like Dario and I, we're like
Red
Uber
tiny.
fans. Right, we're come on, like, do really James Patterson, I read once that like every seventh book was written by him. Like, you're done, man. Go, God bless you, but can I please have my tiny little.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think when one way you have to drown out the noise is what like maybe once a week I'll look at all the things I subscribe to and just start reading through those because people just
Yeah.
subscribe willy-nilly and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it's fun to find somebody on Substack and kind of like stick with them for a while
Yeah. Yeah.
and see what they're up to. Because otherwise there's just too much. It's like and it could be too much of a good thing, right? It's like the problem with like
Mm.
Spotify. You can hear everything you want to hear like any moment, but the reason I love a phonograph is because it makes you slow down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
I
that's
I think setting up Substack so that you have a kind of methodology to engage with it, I think
yeah.
is really important because, I mean, and that you have to sort of factor into that all of the other social media or whatever
Right.
you engage with. But I have this sort of unerring feeling of everything's kind of chaotic, and I want to imprint a bit of
Yeah.
control onto it. But in the meta modernistic world, that idea of carving out a very specific sense that what's important, what's valuable, even what's good or bad. That's a real process of labor,
I
right
mean,
now. So, yeah, I don't know whether there is an answer to that beyond the fact of just not worrying about it so much.
yeah. Because then you don't want to cut yourself off to happy accidents.
Yeah,
'Cause you
Yeah.
discover someone on Substack and you're like, "Wow, like, this is really good." Like,
Mm,
and then you find out that the person already has 200 posts,
sure.
and you're like, "Wow, that's really good. Like, I'm glad I stumbled on that." And,
Yeah.
so you just I think you're right. You just can do the best you can.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny with the emails coming, I tend to stick to the app or to the
Me
desktop
too.
website rather than,
Yeah.
because the emails just come 10 a penny as it is. I prefer to
Right.
stay on the site.
Yes,
Um,
100%. I like using the app, yeah.
so let's talk a little bit about these two articles then.
Sure.
So the first one, the biggest lie about the movies. I mean, obviously there's a sort of tongue-in-cheek, provocative
Sure.
element to that
Right.
title, right? And I think both of them are a little bit like that.
Yes.
Because obviously I can kind of detect that sense that there isn't
Mhm.
sort of absolutism here, but you argue. I mean, let's start at the beginning with the two films because I think they're interesting, aren't they? The 2023 documentary 999,
Mhm.
which is Luba Playhouse, which is a kind of unofficial sequel to 666, which is
Mhm.
the vendor's film.
Yes.
So maybe you could sort of just give us a little bit background of those two films and how they kind of inspired you or provoked you into this sort of feeling about what these directors maybe being a little bit out of touch about what cinema going is really like.
Yeah, some of them are, and thank you for we'll start. I wanna do my disclaimer here that I'm glad you recognize that a lot of it is tongue in cheek, not all of it, but I'm not like we'll get into this, like, I'm not the old man yelling at a cloud. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna walk around like, "Get off my lawn, you kids," like, and only I know what goes on in movies. Um, but it was funny, so you said, like, right, so the movies are Room 666 and
Yes.
Room 999. So if you try to
Yeah.
just go on IMDb and look for 666, you'll just get a million
Yeah.
statistics.
Yeah. Apologies. Yeah. Let's get it right for sure.
So in 1982, Wim Wenders made this movie where he had Werner Herzog and all these other directors come on at this hotel room during the Cannes Film Festival, and he asked them, like, "What's the current state of cinema?" And now in 2023, we have Room 999, and that one it showed up on the Criterion Channel, which we might talk about, which I love. And the idea was, there's a camera in a hotel room, and there's probably close to I have 25 directors who come in and they have the same question, like, what is the state of cinema today? And some of them talk for 30 seconds, some of them talk for 10 minutes, and the camera doesn't move, and everyone's the same. So it's a really interesting movie because you're invited to see how the directors are talking to each other, but they're not really in the same room. And there's a lot of really interesting ideas in it. Like a lot of them talk about, and you have people like David Cronenberg, you have who's Pietro Marcello. You have a lot of people say a lot of interesting things. A lot of directors are upset about distribution, about how their movies get out there. Um, there's an idea that runs through it that as movie studios get bigger and we're allowed to spend, we as if I made one, but as directors are allowed to spend more money on movies, they're actually limiting the artistic range of expression
Sure.
because no one wants to make a mid-level $30 million movie about a family anymore. Everything's got to be if you then you have to up the stakes. And now the family,
Yeah.
the sister has to actually be an extraterrestrial, and the husband has to be a spy. I'm like, okay, so that's like a really interesting thing. But one thing that grinded my gears was when you have directors go on about how we're losing the communal sense of visiting the cinema together. And for years, I've always thought to myself, like, I never bought into that, and I never understood why other people's reactions are supposed to be a force multiplier for my pleasure.
Yeah.
And we read alone, and that's a solitary thing. I don't mind going to the movies myself. Do you ever go to the movies by yourself?
All the time.
All the time, right? So
Yeah.
why do you like going to the movies by yourself?
Well, it's an interesting question because I am going to push back a little bit on what you say because I think it's interesting. But the reason I like going to the movies by myself, particularly, is because I like the room, the space around the film.
Mhm.
I like to have my own time before and my own time after to digest what I've seen.
Yeah,
Um, but having said that, I don't think what I'm not saying is that I prefer to go alone.
sure.
I'm saying that I don't mind going alone, and it has
Right.
its own thing, and going with other people is a different thing in my mind. And what the reason I'm saying that is because, um, I think that there are times when I'll go alone and then there's nobody in there, so there isn't a sort of sense of that communal experience. But there are other contexts in which I've been on my own, but there's a room full of people,
Mhm.
and I have felt a kind of communal experience because there's some kind of vibe that we've all experienced something together. But I think it's film specific, it's context specific, it's moment specific in that sense.
Fair enough, that's true. When I saw King Kong last week, I went by myself, and I don't that's funny, I don't prefer going myself because I'm not, like, antisocial, right? But,
Right.
the thing I love about going alone is that I always feel like, yes, you get to just process it yourself, but you're also not responsible for someone else's good time.
No,
Because if you
that's
think
true.
someone who someone's like, "I don't wanna go, Dario," and you're like, "Come on, just come with me," and then the movie's not
Yeah,
yet
yeah,
good, you're
yeah.
kinda like, "Oh, I ruined your Saturday too." Um, so so I understand everything you're saying about context. The thing that made me raise an eyebrow is this idea that that everyone goes to the theater and behaves as well as they did when I saw King Kong last week.
Right.
Because I started writing about, as you know, in the article, about the idea that this romanticization of the film going experience seems to me not in line with what it's like to go to the movies in at least where I live today.
Right. Yeah, and I think one of the quotes, which I'm just going to quickly read out, is from Asghar Farhadi, the Iranian filmmaker.
Mhm.
And you use this quote because it kind of encapsulates this romanticization.
Yes.
So he says, "To me, cinema is not just about viewing. The thing that I grew up with and that I miss is the fact that you had to decide to go out, walk, get out of the cab, change cars, stand in line, buy a ticket, purchase some snacks, and find a seat in the movie theater along with hundreds of other people. We laugh or are silent together. We watch the movie, leave the theater, and discuss it together. When we go home at night, we talk about it with those who saw it. It's like a journey, a ritual we all share. And today, this aspect of cinema no longer interests the new generation. There is no longer that need. If someone can watch a film at home, they will. I don't. I don't like that. The ritual of going to a movie theater has disappeared. Now, in some senses, I kind of see a problem with that being an encapsulation of what should happen all the time. Because again, I like that idea of context. You know what I mean? Sometimes that happens, that kind of thing happens, but all of those things happening together is a very idealized proposition. I grant you, but I don't think I would suggest that what he's saying there is not necessarily about behavior.
Mhm.
That's more about a culture that we're in now, and we could talk about streaming because you do talk
Yeah.
about it in the article. A culture now which doesn't value the kind of all encapsulating embodied experience of going as part of the experience of the film itself.
Well, I think that's absolutely true, right? Is that what does the culture value? When I go to the movies, I value what's up on the screen.
Right.
And I value that higher than anything else. I value it more than what I'm eating, than what I'm thinking about. Like, the idea is, like, that's what you're supposed to be doing. When you read a book, you're supposed to be all in. If you
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
pay
yeah.
attention to what you're reading, then, like, the book and you aren't a good match.
Right.
Um, and so when you go to the movies, you're supposed to be all in, and that's, like, the best movie experience is when it's over and you're like, "Oh," and you walk out of a matinee and the sun hits you,
Yeah.
and you're like, "Oh my gosh," like, that now that doesn't happen every time, but
Mm.
when it does, it's really powerful. And so if every moment you went to the movies was like that, that will be excellent. And I've been at I mean, I make jokes in the article, but there have been many times I've seen films where the silence was actually so heavy in the movie theater that you could tell, like you said about context, right? I remember seeing,
Mm.
and it's funny because these are revival houses. These are full of people who usually know how to behave in the movies.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But like I remember seeing Raging Bull
Mm.
at a local independent. Took one of my kids who my kids are always getting dragged to old movies, and when it got to the end and the credits came on, you could just it was so tense in the movie theater and so
Mm.
heavy, and it wouldn't have been the same if I was on my couch. It just
Yeah,
wouldn't have
yeah.
been the same thing.